Hey guys, tonight we slip into the soft golden dawn of ancient Egypt. You wake in a place where the air is warm, even before the sun has fully climbed, where the Nile has been quietly lapping at its banks through the night, and where the first sounds of geese and donkeys echo between walls made of sun-baked mud brick. There's a haze of wood smoke drifting over the rooftops. Because, yes, even thousands of years ago, someone had to get up early to make breakfast. You stretch, rub your eyes, and realize that the day ahead will be long, hot, and full of sand in places you'd rather it not be. And trust me, you probably wouldn't survive this routine between disease, back-breaking labor, and the occasional crocodile lurking by the riverbank. It's a miracle anyone did. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like sharing, drop a comment with your location and the local time where you are. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sun edges higher, and you find yourself among ordinary Egyptians as they stir awake. It's not pharaohs and golden tombs first thing in the morning. It's the smell of barley porridge, the bleating of goats, and children squabbling as they tumble out of sleep on reed mats. A rooster crows, though let's be honest, in this climate, you were already awake from the heat. The mud brick walls of the home around you are plain, practical, and just thick enough to keep the worst of the sun out. No air conditioning, no Netflix, just the Nile breeze if you're lucky. You step outside, blinking against the brilliance of the desert sun. Already, villagers are heading toward the river, with jars balanced on their heads. Water is life here, not a poetic metaphor, but a daily fact. The Nile floods set the rhythm of existence. Plant, harvest, pray the water rises just enough, but not too much. Historians still argue whether the early Egyptians precisely measured those floods with nilometers, or if that practice came later. But either way, the water ruled. The scenery is vivid. Palm trees fringe the riverbank, their fronds clattering in the wind. Beyond them stretch endless fields, where you'll soon see bent backs and calloused hands at work. Out past the fertile strip, the desert yawns wide and yellow, dotted with the occasional jackal who looks like he knows too much. That constant contrast, lush green reborn against deadly sand, shaped every Egyptian thought about survival and gods. A farmer passes you carrying a rough wooden hoe over his shoulder. He nods without ceremony. No time for chit-chat, not with fields to tend. Nearby, a woman balances a jar of water with the grace of an acrobat, her little daughter trailing close behind, giggling as she pretends to do the same. Cats weave between their feet, tails held high as if reminding everyone that they're really the ones in charge here. One mainstream historical fact: most Egyptians weren't royalty or priests, but farmers tied to the land. They lived in mud brick houses, ate simple food, and worked in sync with the river. Yet quirky details slip through. Some households smeared crocodile dung mixed with honey as sunscreen. Imagine slathering that on before a day in the fields. Not exactly your modern SPF 50, but hey, maybe it worked. As the morning builds, you notice the layered sounds of life, the thunk of wooden mallets as someone repairs a boat, the creak of leather sandals on dusty ground, the shrill chatter of ducks herded toward the river, and somewhere, a lone reed flute playing a melody that feels older than words. Egypt wakes not with silence, but with a chorus of labor and small joys. You duck into a temple courtyard where early worshippers leave offerings, bread, beer, a flower or two, carefully placed before carved images of falcon-headed Horus or cat-eyed Bastet. The paint is still bright in some spots, the walls daubed with deep blues and reds. You run your fingers across the cool stone and wonder if the gods are listening. Priests chant nearby, their voices low, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. You're not sure what they're saying, but it feels like the day is officially underway. Then comes the first little joke life plays. As you stroll back through the village, a goose flaps straight at your face, honking loudly. Wings beating like a feathered battering ram, it chases you until a boy scoops it up, laughing hysterically. Apparently, guard dogs are overrated when you've got geese. Meanwhile, over by the river, fishermen haul in nets heavy with tilapia. They pull the wriggling catch into woven baskets, the smell already sharp under the sun. Some fish will be dried, others cooked tonight. But all of it will be vital protein in a land where meat is rare. You wrinkle your nose, but your stomach grumbles anyway. Not far from the fisherman, a scribe sits cross-legged under a bit of shade, reed brush in hand, scratching neat rows of hieratic script onto a roll of papyrus. Maybe it's a tax list. Maybe it's a love poem. Egyptians used papyrus for everything from business records to spells against scorpions. Historians still argue whether literacy was wider than we once thought, or mostly limited to this scribal elite. Either way, you realize that writing in ancient Egypt was both a magical skill and a bureaucrat's nightmare. The sun climbs, and the Nile gleams like liquid bronze. You find yourself slowing down, lulled by the rhythm of daily life. It isn't glamorous, but it's steady. Here, survival isn't about conquest or monuments. It's about making sure there's enough bread, enough water, enough shade. You breathe in the warm air, feel the grit of sand on your skin, and notice how your own heartbeat seems to sync with the timeless pulse of the river. And just when you think you've got the morning figured out, a child tugs at your sleeve and offers you a small clay amulet shaped like an eye, the eye of Horus, meant to protect you from harm. You slip it into your palm and feel oddly reassured, as if even in this ancient place, you have been folded into the routines of community and care. The day stretches ahead, and with it, endless small labors and rituals that tie these people together. You keep walking, drifting deeper into their world, feeling the weight of sun and time pressing gently but insistently on your shoulders. The sun has lifted fully now, laying a warm glaze over the village, and your stomach gives you a gentle nudge. Time for breakfast. Don't get too excited. This isn't a buffet with pancakes and espresso. Here your day begins with bread so rough it could probably double as a kitchen sponge, and beer that tastes, well, let's call it earthy and move on. You wander toward a communal oven where women squat near a low fire, kneading dough with practiced hands. The smell of baking barley bread fills the air, smoky and nutty, but also a little gritty. That grit? It comes from tiny bits of sand and stone that got ground into the flour on stone mills. Egyptians ate so much of this rough bread that their teeth wore down to stubs. Dentists today would weep, but hey, at least there was no dental insurance paperwork. Nearby, you're handed a small clay cup filled with cloudy liquid. This is beer, but forget any ideas of chilled lagers or foamy craft pours. Egyptian beer is thick, almost like a soupy smoothie of fermented barley, with a frothy top that might leave grain husks in your teeth. Yet it's safe to drink, packed with calories and enjoyed by everyone from workers to pharaohs. Think of it as ancient Gatorade, minus the neon colors. Historians still argue whether this beer was mildly alcoholic or packed a serious punch. Some evidence suggests it was closer to low-alcohol porridge, but other writings mention drunken parties that sound suspiciously wild. Either way, you sip it and feel a comforting warmth spread through you. Breakfast accomplished. The meal isn't glamorous, but it's filling. Coarse bread dipped in onion sauce, maybe a few lentils, and, if you're lucky, a date or fig for sweetness. That's about as good as it gets unless you're high up the social ladder. Meat, rare, unless you're feasting at a temple. Cheese, not really. Coffee, forget it. This is a survival food designed to keep you standing in the fields all day. One mainstream historical fact: bread and beer weren't just staples, they were currency. Wages for pyramid builders and government workers were often paid in loaves and jars of beer. Imagine your paycheck arriving as 20 loaves of crusty barley bread. You'd better like carbs. Yet tucked into this simple meal are quirks. Garlic and onions were beloved not just for taste, but for supposed magical powers. Workers even took onions into tombs, believing they repelled evil spirits. So yes, morning breath in Egypt was a spiritual defense mechanism. Romantic, maybe not. Effective, hopefully. As you chew, a boy runs past balancing a basket of figs, shouting to advertise his father's orchard. Behind him, an old woman sells dried fish wrapped in papyrus. the smell sharp enough to cut through the dusty air. A couple of donkeys bray like they're auditioning for a comedy show, and somewhere a dog barks, just to remind everyone that cats don't rule everything. You sit on a low stone ledge and watch life swirl around you. Children chase each other with palm fronds, their laughter mixing with the hiss of bread pulled from the oven. Men dip their loaves into clay bowls of beans, talking about the flood season as if they were predicting stock market trends. The Nile's rhythm dictates their harvest, their diet, their lives. Bread and beer are just the edible form of the river's gift. Suddenly, a neighbor leans over and offers you something unusual. A small cake sweetened with honey. Your eyes widen. Sugar is rare here. Honey was treasured, often used in offerings to the gods. The cake melts on your tongue, rich and fragrant. A moment of luxury in a world of coarse bread. You close your eyes and savor it, like a bite of sunshine. But not every bite is pleasant. Someone nearby pops a roasted locust into his mouth, like it's no big deal. Protein is protein, but you politely pass. That's one culinary adventure you're willing to skip. Another fringe tidbit. Some texts suggest Egyptians flavored their beer with mandrake or dates, adding a bit of extra kick. If that's true, breakfast could double as a mild psychedelic experience. You glance at your cup again, wondering if the warmth spreading through you is just barley or something more. The morning meal winds down as people prepare for work. Pots are washed in the river, baskets are stacked, and children are herded back inside. You wipe crumbs from your lap, stand and stretch. Your belly is full enough to face the sun-baked hours ahead. And just as you're about to walk off, a cat leaps gracefully onto the table, steals the last bite of bread, and stares at you with smug, golden eyes. You're in Egypt now. Cats get away with everything. Your stomach still warm with bread and beer, you join the flow of villagers heading toward the fields. The Nile glitters like a ribbon of gold beside you, and the air is already heating up. You tug at your rough linen tunic, which sticks just enough to remind you that this isn't exactly spa weather. The fields stretch in front of you, patchwork green where irrigation channels feed rows of wheat, barley, and flax. In the distance, oxen plod along, dragging simple wooden plows. Farmers bend low, their backs permanent crescents against the sun, hands hardened from years of tugging weeds and scooping mud. You glance at them and think, your gym membership has nothing on this. One mainstream historical fact: the entire agricultural calendar revolved around the Nile's annual flood. When the river swelled, it left behind black silt that enriched the soil, turning desert into farmland. Without it, Egypt would have been just endless sand. Historians still argue whether early flood predictions came more from observing stars like Sirius or from careful measurement devices. Either way, everyone here knows the water's rise or fall decides if bellies will be full or empty. You kneel beside a farmer spreading seed by hand, tossing it across furrows with a rhythm passed down through generations. He grins, a gap-toothed smile, and gestures for you to try. The seeds fall unevenly from your palm, clumping together, and he laughs gently, shaking his head as if to say, "Leave the farming to us." Quirky tidbit. To help sow seed, Egyptians sometimes used goats. Farmers would scatter grain, then release a herd of goats to trample it into the earth. Eco-friendly farming with added bleating soundtrack. You can almost imagine the goats thinking they're helping when really they're just stomping and snacking. Around you, irrigation ditches gurgle with diverted Nile water. Men scoop water with shadoufs, long wooden poles weighted with stones, that swing up and down like seesaws. The splash of water joins the chorus of croaking frogs and buzzing insects. Sweat beads on your skin, but the workers barely pause. This has been life for centuries. As midday nears, the sun sharpens overhead, bleaching the sky. You shade your eyes and watch a boy chase birds from the crops by waving a stick and shouting. His dog joins in, barking fiercely at a flock of ibises that scatter with indignant squawks. Bird control is a full-time job here. One careless flock could undo weeks of hard labor. Nearby, women gather flax, their arms stacked with tall bundles destined to become linen. They move quickly, chatting about neighbors, children, and the latest temple gossip. You catch fragments of laughter, even teasing, proof that even under a relentless sun, humor survives. And then there's the smell. Earthy mud from the river, sharp onion fields, and a faint tang of manure from oxen pulling carts. It's not glamorous, but it's the fragrance of survival. In a small corner of the field, you notice something curious. A man carefully burying a tiny clay figurine near the crops. He whispers words you can't quite catch. It's a charm for fertility, not of people, but of the land. Farmers here believed magic and toil went hand in hand. Hard work sowed the seed, but prayers and charms might make it grow. Historians still argue whether these practices were personal superstitions or part of organized temple rituals. But either way, the blend of sweat and sorcery was real. Then comes a little absurdity. As you wade closer to a canal, your sandal squelches deep into the mud. You tug, you wiggle, you nearly topple. But the sandal stays behind, swallowed whole. A group of children nearby burst into giggles, pointing. One boy fishes your sandal out with a stick, hands it back, and says something in a tone that clearly translates to amateur. The day grinds on, and you feel the ache in your back, the sting of sun on your skin. You begin to understand why the afterlife was painted as fields that grew food effortlessly, where workers never sweated. For now, though, you're just another body bent under the Egyptian sun. And when the workday finally pauses, you share a drink of tepid beer with the farmers sitting on the edge of the canal. They pass a jar around, cracked clay slick with condensation. You tilt it back, grateful, and laugh with them when someone tells a joke you don't quite catch, but whose punchline clearly involves an ox. The Nile flows beside you, steady, eternal, promising life and threatening famine all at once. You lean back on your elbows, feeling the earth still damp from the flood, and realize just how much every loaf of bread depends on these endless, blistering hours in the fields. The fields fade behind you as you walk back toward the cluster of mud brick houses that make up the village. The walls glow a soft beige in the afternoon light. Though, let's be honest, glow is generous. They're crumbly, cracked, and patched more times than your favorite old pair of jeans. Mud brick doesn't age gracefully. It melts in the rain, bakes in the sun, and sags under the weight of time. Still, it's cheap, easy to make, and it holds out the desert winds better than nothing. You duck through a low doorway into one of these homes. Inside, the air is cooler, though smoky from a small hearth that has no chimney, just a hole in the roof. The space is simple. A few reed mats on the floor, clay jars stacked neatly along one wall, and a wooden chest that creaks when opened. No couches, no closets, no home office. Just bare essentials. Though you'd be surprised how much life can fit inside these compact walls. One mainstream historical fact: the average Egyptian house had just 2 or 3 rooms. Families slept on the roof in hot weather, under stars so sharp they seemed to pierce the sky. At night, you'd climb a narrow mud brick stair and stretch out on woven mats, listening to dogs bark and crickets buzz. Historians still argue whether these rooftop beds were practical cooling strategies or doubled as sacred spaces for star watching. Either way, you're definitely going to get a better view than from any Airbnb balcony. You poke around and find the kitchen corner, if you can call it that. A clay oven, blackened from use, squats beside a few grinding stones where grain is crushed into flour. The stones are worn smooth, telling the story of countless mornings spent leaning over them, shoulders aching. A basket of onions sits nearby, their sharp scent mixing with the earthy aroma of dried lentils. It's not glamorous, but it's dinner. Children play in the doorway, carving little animals out of mud. Their laughter bounces off the walls, filling the space with energy. A woman scolds gently as she sweeps, flicking dust into the street. You notice a cat sprawled lazily in the corner, eyes half closed, pretending not to care but definitely keeping one ear tuned to the movement of the children's hands. Quirky tidbit: some houses had tiny niches carved into the walls to hold protective amulets or household gods. Imagine a little clay Bess, the dwarf god of protection, grinning down at you as you stirred your soup. He was meant to ward off evil, though with his bug-eyed stare and lion mane, he might also have scared away dinner guests. You glance upward, noticing the beams of palm wood that support the flat roof. Dried reeds and mud plaster fill the gaps, and occasionally, little tufts of straw poke out like unruly hair. A lizard scampers across the ceiling, disappearing into a crack. You're reminded that houses here aren't just for people. They're shared with the whole local ecosystem. In one corner, a loom stands upright. Half-woven linen hanging in loose sheets. The fabric is light, perfect for heat, though rougher than what priests and royalty wear. You run your fingers across it and feel the faint scratch. Every thread means hours of work, hours someone gave up from farming or cooking. Linen wasn't just clothing, it was currency, a sign of stability, sometimes even an offering to the gods. And then comes a little domestic comedy. You step outside for air, only to trip over a jar left near the door. It tips, spilling dried chickpeas across the dusty ground. Immediately, children shriek with delight and scramble to pick them up, pocketing a few as snacks. You mutter an apology, but the mother just shakes her head, amused. You get the feeling clumsy visitors are nothing new. Evening shadows lengthen, and smoke begins to curl from dozens of hearths. The village smells like roasted fish and lentil stew. Neighbors sit outside, gossiping. The hum of voices carrying across narrow alleys. Someone strums a lute softly, and the notes rise and fall like the hush of the Nile. Inside one home, a family gathers around the meal. Bread torn into chunks, dipped into bowls of beans, washed down with beer. You notice how everyone shares, dipping from the same dish, fingers brushing occasionally. Meals aren't about individual plates. They're about community, about survival together. You settle on the roof later that night, lying on a mat. The mud brick beneath you is still warm from the day's heat. Overhead, the stars blaze, thousands of them, brighter than you've ever seen without city lights. A donkey brays in the distance, a dog answers, and somewhere a baby cries. Life is messy, cramped, sometimes smoky, but also intimate, connected, and steady. As you drift towards sleep on that roof, you realize these mud brick homes aren't just shelters. They're small universes, each packed with laughter, labor, amulets, and onions. They crumble, yes, but they're remade, again and again, just like the people who live inside them. The night on the rooftop is short, and before you know it, the horizon glows again. As the village stirs awake, you notice the heartbeat of life here isn't just bread and fields, it's families. You watch as a man ties a reed rope around his waist, kisses his wife's cheek, and heads off to the fields. She sighs, mutters something you can't hear, and shoos the children into motion. Welcome to the ordinary domestic drama of ancient Egypt. Marriage in this world isn't about love letters or candlelit dinners. It's practical, often arranged, sometimes affectionate, and occasionally, let's be honest, strained. A young girl might marry around her early teens, her husband a few years older. Contracts were drawn up not only for dowries, but also for divorce, which was surprisingly common and not the social catastrophe you'd expect. You can almost hear the lawyers of antiquity sighing in relief. Paperwork has always been steady business. One mainstream historical fact: women in ancient Egypt enjoyed more legal rights than in many later civilizations. They could own property, inherit wealth, and initiate divorce. That doesn't mean life was a feminist utopia. Most women still worked endlessly in homes and fields, but the law at least gave them a voice. Historians still argue whether this legal equality translated into everyday power or if it was more symbolic than real. Children swirl around the households like sand caught in a breeze. They chase each other barefoot through alleys, splashing in irrigation ditches, playing games with knuckle bones or carved dolls. Their laughter cuts through the daily grind, though you can also hear a mother's sharp voice when one child gets too close to the cooking fire. Infant mortality is high. Every scraped knee feels more dangerous in a world without antibiotics. Parents hover, fiercely protective, knowing how fragile those little lives are. And then there are the pets, cats especially. One quirky tidbit: Egyptians so adored their cats that when a family cat died, members sometimes shaved their eyebrows as a sign of mourning. Imagine walking around with bare brows, people nodding solemnly, knowing you'd just lost your furry roommate. Dogs were kept too, often as hunters or guards, but cats ruled the household. In this very moment, you spot one sprawled on a mat, licking its paw, clearly unconcerned with cosmic responsibilities. Children toss scraps of bread to that cat, shrieking when it leaps gracefully to snatch the food. You can't help but notice. The cat eats better than some of the people here. It purrs smugly, flicks its tail, and returns to sunbathing. Dogs might guard, but cats command. Domestic life isn't without its humor. You watch a boy proudly parade a frog he's caught, holding it high like a treasure. His mother shrieks, waving a reed broom until he drops it, laughing hysterically. Or another child, trying to imitate his father's stern voice, scolds the family goat for stealing grain. The goat chews placidly, unimpressed. In the evenings, families gather close. The house fills with warm voices. Women grinding grain, men patching tools, children dozing against their parents' laps. A grandmother leans forward, telling a story of gods and monsters, her hands moving like shadows in the flickering lamplight. You don't understand every word, but you catch enough. The moral is clear: behave, or crocodile-headed Sobek might come for you. The air smells of stew simmering with lentils and onions, and smoke clings to your hair. It's cozy, though cramped. You wonder how many people actually live under this one roof, probably more than the number of beds. Privacy here is a luxury no one expects. Another small detail: Babies are often swaddled in linen and carried slung over a shoulder, soothed by the rocking rhythm of chores. Mothers sing softly, lullabies that sound like flowing water, and sometimes charms are tied to the baby's wrists, tiny amulets in the shape of scarabs or eyes to ward off evil. The line between parenting and magic is blurry. Historians still argue whether these charms were believed to have literal power or if they were just comforting traditions. But either way, you feel the weight of love behind them. The family cat suddenly stretches, yawns, and curls up beside a baby's basket, as if volunteering for guard duty. The mother nods approvingly. In her eyes, the cat is more than a pet. It's divine insurance. And yet, beneath the warmth, you sense the hardship. Bread is rationed carefully. Work begins early and ends late. Illness hovers like a shadow. Still, within these humble walls, there's laughter, affection, and even mischief. Families here cling tightly, because in a world of sand, flood, and sun, each other is all they really have. You lean back against the wall as evening deepens. Children dozing, cats purring, and the stars returning overhead. In this home, life may be simple, but it's whole. The night has barely cooled the air, but by morning you notice something else stirring in the village. Not just people and animals, but gods. Every corner of Egyptian life seems brushed with the divine, as if the gods are nosy neighbors who never quite leave you alone. You can't even wash your face without some amulet hanging nearby to help. You pass a doorway and see a woman tying a charm shaped like an eye to her child's wrist. The Eye of Horus, she explains, protects against illness and envy. The boy tugs at it like any kid with a scratchy bracelet, but she shoos his hands away. Mainstream historical fact: amulets were mass-produced in Egypt, carved from stone, fonts, or even cheap clay. Rich or poor, everyone carried one. Tiny insurance policies in a land where danger came from snakes, scorpions, and fevers that killed in a night. Historians still argue whether people thought of these amulets as literal magic batteries, or more as symbolic reminders of divine favor. Quirky tidbit: crocodile dung wasn't just sunscreen. It was sometimes pressed into charms, or mixed into ointments to invoke Sobek, the crocodile god of fertility and protection. You imagine telling your dermatologist you're rubbing crocodile poop for divine coverage. The village hums with ordinary chores, yet every action leans into ritual. A woman grinding grain murmurs a prayer under her breath, asking Hathor to bless her hands. A fisherman spits into the river before casting his net, a quick offering to Hapi, spirit of the Nile. Even children join in. One girl leaves a flower on a small shrine carved into a wall niche, her serious little face illuminated by the rising sun. You step into the temple courtyard at the heart of the settlement. Incense curls upward, sweet and sharp, clinging to your throat. Priests shuffle barefoot across polished stone, their linen robes dazzlingly white compared to the dust-stained tunics outside. They chant hymns that roll like waves, their voices echoing against high painted walls. Carved figures of jackal-headed Anubis and falcon-headed Horus gaze down, their eyes painted with such detail you half expect them to blink. Offerings crowd the altars, bread loaves, onions, a little honey, jars of beer. You notice a jar that looks suspiciously light, as if someone sampled it on the way here. People place these gifts not just for favor, but for balance, part of the cosmic order the Egyptians called Ma'at. You breathe in the incense, the sweat, the faint moldy smell of aging offerings, and realize devotion is rarely tidy. The priest takes a small statue of Bastet, goddess of cats, and waves incense before it. You chuckle quietly. Somewhere in the temple's shadows, a very real cat winds between worshippers, tail held high, utterly ignoring the ceremony as if she is Bastet and doesn't need the theatrics. Then you catch a quieter ritual in the corner. A midwife tying a protective knot around a pregnant woman's belly. Bes, the squat, lion-maned god of childbirth, is invoked with a quick chant. The expectant mother clutches a small figure of Taweret, the hippo goddess of fertility. You wonder if she finds more comfort in the magic, or simply in knowing others care. Another small comedy interrupts the solemnity. A goat wanders in through the open gate, nibbles on an offering loaf, and trots out before anyone can stop it. The priest scowls, but the villagers laugh softly. Perhaps the gods won't mind sharing with the goat. The layers of faith wrap around you like linen bandages. Ritual here isn't once a week. It's every moment. Lighting a lamp, say a prayer, cutting flax, wear a charm. Even bad hair days can call for divine help. There's a spell scratched onto a piece of pottery that essentially says, "May my hair not fall out." You can't help but grin. Proof that vanity is timeless. As the day drifts on, the temple quiets. Shadows stretch across painted columns, their colors still vivid despite centuries of dust and heat. You run your fingers over the carved lines and feel the groove of countless hands before yours. Every gesture, every prayer, every loaf placed on the altar adds up to a rhythm of life inseparable from the divine. You step back outside into the blinding sun, clutching a tiny faience amulet someone pressed into your palm. Its shape is rough, an ankh, symbol of life. You hold it against your skin and feel, just for a moment, the strange comfort it brings. Maybe it's magic, maybe it's psychology, but either way, you're part of this woven fabric now. And as you walk away, a boy runs past with a basket of onions, muttering something about offerings. You wonder if the gods ever get tired of bread, beer, and onions. But then again, who wouldn't appreciate snacks at all hours? The day leans into its heat, and you find yourself wandering away from the temple toward the workshops where hands shape the very bones of Egyptian civilization. The sound hits first, hammering on copper, chisels on limestone, the whir of bow drills. It's a symphony of sweat and skill, and you can't help but pause, watching sparks of creativity fly in a world without electricity. A coppersmith bends over his fire, bellows pumping rhythmically as the coals flare hot enough to glow. He grips a half-formed tool with tongs, pounding it with a stone hammer until it flattens into shape. Mainstream historical fact, though bronze eventually dominated in other regions, Egypt leaned heavily on copper for centuries, shaping it into chisels, saws, and jewelry. Strong enough for daily use, but not indestructible. Tools wore down quickly, keeping craftsmen busy. Historians still argue whether Egypt's slower adoption of widespread bronze was due to resource scarcity, trade politics, or just tradition. You edge closer to a potter's wheel, hypnotized by the steady spin. Clay rises and falls between skilled hands, reshaping from wobbling lump into smooth jar. The potter barely looks, his eyes on the horizon, his fingers moving with memory rather than sight. You glance at the rows of finished jars behind him, lined like soldiers awaiting inspection. Some are plain for storing pale grain, others painted with bold red swirls for offerings. And there, in the corner, a cracked reject jar, now serving as a chicken feeder. Recycling, ancient style, quirky tidbit. Artisans sometimes added straw or even chopped dung into their clay to help it bind better and fire without cracking. Imagine proudly drinking from a mug that once had cow poop as a stabilizer. You take a tiny step back from the pottery, suddenly less eager to sip water. Across the lane, carpenters work under an awning of woven reeds. They carve planks of imported cedar. Yes, Egypt had to trade far and wide for quality wood, since palm trunks splinter too easily. One man fits together a small chest with clever joints that need no nails. Another shaves a chair leg until it's smooth. You run your fingers along the polished wood and feel the hours hidden in each surface. But the real marvels are the painters and sculptors working on tomb goods. You watch as one dips a reed brush into crushed red ochre, his strokes careful as he outlines a falcon on a panel destined for someone's eternal resting place. Another grinds lapis lazuli, imported from Afghanistan, into powder, mixing it with gum to create a dazzling blue. The fact that this intense color traveled thousands of miles to end up here, on a wall that would be sealed in darkness, leaves you oddly awestruck. Nearby, a sculptor chips at a limestone block. His chisel leaves sharp, precise marks, slowly revealing the curled wig of a nobleman. Dust coats his arms, his hair, even his eyelashes. But his focus doesn't waver. The statue isn't for him. It's for someone else's eternity. And yet you sense pride in each careful awful strike. Suddenly, laughter erupts. A boy has knocked over a basket of reeds, and now chickens are darting everywhere, clucking furiously. The artisans chuckle, shooing them away with brushes and chisels. The boy scrambles to collect the reeds, cheeks red, while one particularly bold chicken hops onto a half-finished stool like it's claiming ownership. You grin. It's the timeless chaos of a workplace. Amid the noise, you notice a group of weavers, their looms creaking softly as linen grows thread by thread. Women pass shuttles back and forth, their hands flying, the warp and weft tightening into fabric. Some of the linen is fine, almost sheer, destined for priests and the wealthy. Other bolts are coarse, for farmers and workers. Either way, every strip of cloth is the result of hours of patient labor. One woman holds up a piece, squints, and sighs dramatically. She mutters something about the thread being cursed. Another weaver snorts and replies, "It's not cursed. You're just distracted by the coppersmith's muscles." The whole group bursts into giggles. Even in 1200 BCE, the workshop gossip mill thrived. Historians still argue whether artisans in Egypt were free workers, temple employees, or bound more like serfs. What's clear is that their work shaped everything, from the humble beer jar you sipped earlier to the dazzling golden coffins you've only seen in museums. Their fingerprints, literal and metaphorical, are on the bones of history. The sun slants lower as you leave the workshop, ears still ringing from hammers and laughter. You glance back once more, seeing copper glint, brushes move, reeds weave. It strikes you that while pharaohs get their names carved in stone, it's the anonymous hands in these workshops that truly made Egypt endure. And just as you turn away, you notice a cat curled among the pottery jars, fast asleep, tail twitching. Even here, amid chisels and clay dust, the gods' little enforcers keep watch. By late afternoon, the village stirs into a different rhythm. The fields quiet, the workshops settle, and now the market comes alive. You follow the current of people toward the open square, where the air hums with voices, animals, and the occasional sharp clang of a dropped pot. If the fields were about survival and the workshops about craft, this is about energy, noise, color, and gossip, all braided together. Shawls spill out beneath woven reed canopies, shade doing little to fight the relentless sun. You catch the scent first, dried fish, pungent and sharp. Garlic and onions biting in the air. Honey cakes warm on clay platters, their sweetness almost dizzying. Children dart between legs, laughing, chasing each other with palm frond whips, while donkeys bray as if competing with the merchants' voices. "Fresh figs," a man shouts, holding up a basket with both hands, "straight from the orchard." Another woman counters with, "Linen, fine linen, soft as the Nile breeze." You run your hands over a bolt of fabric, but to be honest, it feels more like sandpaper than silk. Still, compared to your sweat-soaked tunic, it seems tempting. One mainstream historical fact. Markets were central to Egyptian villages, places where bartering ruled. Coins weren't common until much later, so exchanges were made in loaves of bread, jugs of beer, or sacks of grain. Picture haggling over onions with the promise of lending your neighbor a donkey. Historians still argue whether these local markets were heavily regulated by officials or if they thrived mostly on trust and reputation. You pause at a stall where a woman displays amulets, tiny scarabs, eyes, ankhs carved from blue fonts. She presses one into your palm, whispering that it will protect you from gossip. You raise an eyebrow, amused, because clearly nothing can protect anyone from gossip in this square. Quirky tidbit. Papyrus wasn't only for writing, it was also sold as food. Stalls sometimes offered its sweet, starchy roots peeled and chewed like snacks. You watch a boy gnawing happily on a strip of papyrus, grinning with sticky teeth, and think maybe ancient Egypt invented chewing gum. The square itself is a theater. A man with a lute strums and sings verses about a flood season that ruined his crops, turning personal misfortune into comedy. People laugh, toss him scraps of bread, and clap in rhythm. You realize entertainment and trade are inseparable here. Spend your grain. Stay for the show. Nearby, a cluster of women haggle furiously over a jar of honey. Their voices rise higher and higher until one bursts into laughter, handing over twice the original offer. She turns, winking, as if the argument itself was worth the price. And then there's the gossip. Oh, the gossip. You hear snatches everywhere. One woman whispers that the temple priest has been sneaking honey from the offerings. Another insists a neighbor's daughter is marrying someone far above her station. Someone else mutters that the pharaoh's latest decree will raise grain taxes. You don't know which is true, but in this market, rumor spreads faster than smoke on a windy day. As you nibble on a date bought with your last crumb of bread, you're nearly bowled over by a goat sprinting through the crowd, a boy chasing behind shouting apologies. The goat barrels between two stalls, knocking over a stack of clay cups that shatter dramatically. The potter groans, throws up his hands, and yells something you wisely assume is not a blessing. You wander further and notice little details. Women weighing lentils on balances made of sticks and stones. A man carving a reed pen for a scribe. A child juggling pebbles to earn applause. The sounds overlap into a jumble. Donkeys braying, vendors shouting, babies crying, laughter bubbling in between. Historians still argue whether markets like this were mostly run by women or shared equally with men. From where you stand, women seem to run half the show. Voices firm, hands busy, eyes sharp. They tally, they barter, they scold. You wouldn't dream of arguing with them. As the sun lowers, torches and oil lamps begin to flicker on, throwing warm pools of light across stalls. The market doesn't die down, it shifts. Beer jars are opened, music grows louder, and laughter rolls deeper. Somewhere, a man drunkenly tries to dance with a goat, to everyone's amusement. You step back into the shadows for a moment, watching. Bread, beer, onions, gossip, laughter. It's not glamorous, but it's the pulse of life. You can feel it thrumming under your skin, pulling you into the swirl. And for a second, you forget you're a visitor. You're just another hungry, dusty, laughing soul in the chaos of an Egyptian marketplace. The market's laughter fades behind you, and as twilight falls, you sense something heavier in the air, the presence of the pharaoh. Not here in person, of course. You'd never bump into the god king while haggling over onions. But his shadow stretches long, stamped into every loaf of bread, every jug of beer, every whispered tax complaint. You glance at the walls of a nearby building and see his image painted there. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. His gaze is calm, eternal, and just a little smug, as if to say, yes, even your goat problem is my domain. Mainstream historical fact. Egyptians believed the pharaoh wasn't just a king, but a divine bridge between gods and people. His role wasn't merely political, it was cosmic. Without him, the universe itself might unravel. Historians still argue whether ordinary villagers truly saw the pharaoh as a god in flesh, or more as a sacred figurehead propped up by priests and bureaucracy. Your stomach tightens slightly when you hear two farmers muttering. They grumble about increased levies of grain for the state storehouses, about scribes who measure with eyes sharper than hawks, about soldiers who show up if you don't deliver. Taxes here aren't slips of paper. They're literal sacks of barley hauled from your home. And if you don't pay, well, those soldiers are persuasive. In the village square, a scribe unfurls a papyrus scroll, calling out names as men step forward with offerings of grain. The scribe's reed brush scratches numbers beside their names, his voice sharp, precise. You watch as one man argues his flood-damaged field produced less this year. The scribe narrows his eyes, notes something, and waves him off. Justice here feels as fragile as papyrus in the rain. And yet, the pharaoh's presence isn't only felt in taxes. His face appears on temple walls, his name carved into stone lintels, his statues looming in courtyards. Even in the humblest home, you might find a scrap of prayer invoking his health, as if the stability of Egypt rests on his heartbeat. A quirky tidbit. Sometimes pharaohs issued decrees about oddly specific things. One surviving inscription is essentially a royal complaint about people stealing temple geese. Imagine the god king of Egypt pausing from cosmic duties to say, "Stop swiping my birds." You can't help but chuckle. It humanizes the divine ruler in a way statues never do. As darkness thickens, you join a small group headed toward a temple festival in honor of the pharaoh's reign. Torches bob in the night, drums thrum. and dancers whirl in linen skirts that flare like flames. Priests chant hymns praising the king's eternal power, voices echoing against high stone walls. The crowd sways, murmuring responses, some out of devotion, others out of habit. Nearby, a child tugs at her mother's hand, whispering questions. Is the pharaoh truly a god? Will he live forever? The mother hushes her gently, eyes darting to see who might overhear. Faith, duty, fear, they weave together in this place. Historians still argue whether the average villager felt genuine awe or a weary sort of respect for the pharaoh. Did they lie awake marveling at his divine role, or did they roll their eyes when a tax collector walked by? From where you stand, it feels like both. Reverence and irritation coexist, much like your own complicated feelings about modern politicians. The festival swells with music, and suddenly a group of acrobats tumble into the square, flipping and twisting to gasps and laughter. Even here, under the pharaoh's looming gaze, joy finds its way. Children clap, men cheer, women smile despite the burdens waiting at dawn. You step aside, catching sight of a colossal statue in the torchlight. The pharaoh's stone lips curve faintly upward, as if amused by the very scene before him. You wonder if he'd prefer obedience or laughter, or maybe both. The night ends with offerings piled at the temple doors. Bread, beer, incense, and flowers. The smell of burning myrrh lingers in your hair. As you turn away, the weight of the pharaoh's shadow follows, steady and unshakable. You realize that here, in this land of mud brick and starlight, no life escapes that reach. Not farmer, not artisan, not gossiping child. And tomorrow, when the sun rises again, the cycle will continue, as if the pharaoh's heartbeat itself sets the tempo of life. The temple torches dim behind you, and you drift toward quieter streets where the pulse of daily life softens into leisure. For once, no one is plowing, grinding, or bargaining. Instead, people gather in doorways, courtyards, and rooftops, finding small joys to break up the endless cycles of work. You exhale, feeling your shoulders unclench. Finally, a chance to just hang out. A man leans back against a wall, strumming a lute. The melody is light, almost teasing, and children sway to it while gnawing on leftover bread. Nearby, a woman claps wooden clappers in time with the beat. The music isn't polished. It's raw and rhythmic, pulsing like the Nile itself. Mainstream historical fact: ancient Egyptians loved music. Instruments ranged from flutes and harps to rattles and tambourines, often played at festivals, feasts, and even work sites. Historians still argue whether music was formally taught in schools or simply passed down by ear, but the joy on these faces suggests the latter. Quirky tidbit: dancers sometimes performed with trained monkeys. Yes, monkeys in tiny costumes, spinning and tumbling beside human performers. Imagine coming home from the fields to see a monkey steal your beer mid-dance. That's entertainment. You join a circle where men squat around a board scratched into the dust. Pebbles serve as pieces in Senate, one of Egypt's favorite games. Moves are made with throws of casting sticks. Laughter rising when someone's piece gets blocked. One man groans dramatically, throwing his hands skyward as if Osiris himself cursed his play. Another snickers, claiming divine favor for his winning streak. You realize games here aren't just pastimes. They're shadows of belief. Some boards were placed in tombs meant to be played for eternity in the afterlife. Across the courtyard, women sit with baskets of beads, stringing them into necklaces while gossiping. Children plop down beside them, attempting clumsy patterns that inevitably end in tangles. A cat bats at the dangling string, instantly derailing the project. The women laugh, untangling the mess with patience that feels older than time. As dusk deepens, food reappears. Because what's leisure without snacks? Someone hands you a honey cake, sticky and fragrant, while another pours a small cup of beer. You nibble and sip, letting the flavors anchor you in the moment. The beer is frothier now, drunk for pleasure rather than hydration, and the cake crumbles sweetly on your tongue. Then the music shifts. A flute joins the lute, its notes rising high and piercing, like birds calling at dawn. Two young women step forward, hips swaying, arms weaving in slow spirals. The crowd claps in rhythm, cheering when one dancer balances a jug on her head. The jug wobbles dangerously, but never falls. The cheers grow louder, a reminder that even in a land ruled by pharaohs and floods, people crave delight. Historians still argue whether ordinary Egyptians enjoyed free time in the way we think of it, or whether leisure was always bound to festivals and religious duties. From where you sit under torchlight with laughter rolling around you, it feels like they carved out joy wherever they could, whether or not the gods signed off on it. Suddenly, a boy pulls at your sleeve, proudly showing a reed pipe he's fashioned himself. He blows into it, producing a squeak that makes everyone wince, except him. He beams, convinced he's the next great musician. His father ruffles his hair, muttering something that sounds suspiciously like, "Stick to farming." The night air cools, and stars begin to prick the sky. Conversations soften into murmurs. A group of friends share a jug of beer, shoulders leaning together. Children doze in their mothers' laps, lulled by the rhythm of drums still faintly echoing. You lean back, the earth warm beneath you, and let the music settle into your bones. Leisure here isn't about extravagance. It's about community, about squeezing sweetness out of the cracks between labor. A song, a game, a dance. It's enough. You watch the dancers twirl once more. Hear the clappers snap. Feel the cat brush against your leg. And you realize this. Joy in ancient Egypt is simple, fragile, and deeply human. The music lingers faintly in your ears, as dawn breaks again. But now your attention drifts to the fragility of these lives. Bread and beer sustain, yes, but illness is never far. You step into a courtyard where a healer crouches beside a patient, a clay jar of honey open at his side. He dabs it onto a cut, explaining that honey keeps wounds clean. Mainstream historical fact. Honey really does have antibacterial properties, making Egyptian medicine surprisingly effective at times. Historians still argue whether the healer's successes came more from practical remedies or from the thick layer of magic that always accompanied them. Because, oh, the magic. The healer mutters a chant while applying the honey, invoking Isis to close the wound as she closed the cut of Horus. A prayer, a rhyme, a whispered spell. Medicine here is never just physical. You realize patients expect 2 treatments. One from herbs, one from the gods. Skip either, and you're not doing your job. Nearby, another man grimaces as a physician prods his swollen stomach. The healer prescribes a mixture of juniper berries, beer, and brace yourself, cow dung. You instinctively take a step back. Quirky tidbit. Many remedies sound more like dares than cures. Lizard blood, pig eyes, moldy bread. All fair game. And yet, some worked better than you'd guess. Moldy bread, for example, might have had antibiotic properties, centuries before penicillin. Imagine discovering that by accident. You peek inside a small room where a woman cradles her sick child. A midwife ties a protective amulet around the child's neck. The dwarf god Bess, bug-eyed and shaggy, warding off fever. She sprinkles incense and murmurs charms, while the mother rocks back and forth. You feel the weight of desperation. When your child burns with fever, you try everything, no matter how strange. Another patient lies on a mat, his leg crudely bandaged with linen. A hurler sharpens a copper scalpel, and you wince, realizing surgery is about to happen. Egyptians could set broken bones and even attempt primitive operations. Without anesthesia, though, the patient's muffled groans cut deep. The healer's assistant pours beer into his mouth between cries. Hoping to dull the edge, you turn away, queasy, but also awed by their courage. And yet, amid all this, daily quirks surface. A boy with a cough is told to eat dates mixed with donkey milk. He pulls a face, clearly preferring the cough. A woman with a headache presses her head against a clay fish charm, muttering that it will swim the pain away. You stifle a laugh, then stop, because who knows? Maybe it helps. You catch snippets of papyrus scrolls unfurled in the healer's hands. Rows of hieratic script detail recipes. Crush garlic with honey, apply to chest. Mix frankincense with wine for bad breath. It's part cookbook, part spellbook. The line between doctor and priest is blurred, if it exists at all. Historians still argue whether Egyptian medicine was advanced science hampered by superstition. Superstition sprinkled with moments of science. Standing here, you see, it's both, tangled inseparably. A poultice heals, a chant comforts. Together, they give hope as you leave the healer's courtyard. You notice neighbors gathered outside, murmuring prayers. Illness isn't just personal, it ripples through the community. A healthy village depends on each body, each pair of hands. One fever can mean missed harvests. One injury can mean less bread. The air smells of incense, honey, sweat, and smoke. You step into the sun, grateful for your own steady heartbeat. Yet you carry the memory of those groans, those whispered prayers, those strange recipes. Life here is fragile, stitched together with herbs, honey, and hope. And when someone presses a small amulet into your palm, a tiny carved scarab meant to renew your health, you clutch it tightly, just in case. The healer's courtyard fades behind you, and soon you find yourself walking toward the quiet edge of the village, where the desert stretches wide and golden. Here, life brushes against death every day, not as something fearful, but as something woven into the fabric of existence. Egyptians don't whisper about it behind closed doors. They prepare, openly and carefully, as if eternity were just another season waiting to arrive. You follow a small procession making its way toward the necropolis. Women wail with practiced sorrow, tearing at their linen robes, while men carry baskets of bread and beer for offerings. A painted coffin rests on a wooden sledge, pulled slowly across the sand. Its surface gleams with colorful prayers. Eyes, ankhs, falcons, all meant to guide the soul. Mainstream historical fact. Egyptians believed the soul had many parts, ka, ba, ach, and that the body had to be preserved for them to reunite. Hence the famous mummies. Historians still argue whether every villager expected a full afterlife, or if elaborate beliefs were luxuries mostly reserved for the wealthy. You step closer to a workshop where embalmers work, the air heavy with resin and natron. Bodies are dried, wrapped, and painted with spells. It's not grisly so much as meticulous, like a craft. Strips of linen wrap the body over and over, tucked with amulets at the heart, the throat, the wrists. A scarab pressed near the chest whispers protection. Quirky tidbit. Sometimes embalmers even placed onions in the eye sockets of the deceased. Not exactly glamorous, but onions symbolized endurance. Imagine opening your eternal eyes and smelling like stew. Inside a tomb under construction, artisans carve walls with scenes of daily life. Farmers in green fields, families sharing bread, musicians playing harps. You run your hand along the fresh grooves, realizing that Egyptians wanted eternity to mirror their best earthly days. Not golden thrones or endless jewels, just bread, beer, family, and music, stretched forever. The funerary rites continue. Priests in leopard skins chant the opening of the mouth ceremony, touching tools to the coffin to restore the senses of the deceased. You watch as incense calls upward, vanishing into the open sky, carrying prayers with it. Nearby,
Children chase each other between half-built tombs, their laughter oddly at home among the graves. Life and death aren't separate here. They lean against each other like two sides of the same wall. Historians still argue whether the afterlife was imagined as literal fields along the Nile or as a more symbolic paradise. What's clear is that hope itself was the anchor. A conviction that the next world would be gentler, freer from toil, filled with eternal harvests and laughter without end. And just when the air feels too heavy, a small moment cracks it open. A cat curls up on a half-finished sarcophagus, yawning widely as if to say, eternity can wait. Right now, I nap. The mourners laugh softly, tension easing for a heartbeat. Even in grief, humor slips in like a breeze. As the procession ends and the tomb is sealed, the desert sky begins to dim. Torches flicker, casting long shadows over the sand. You feel the hush settle in, the kind of quiet that presses into your bones. Death here isn't an ending, it's a doorway. The people return home with lighter steps, reassured that their loved one now walks fields that never fail, under a sun that never burns. You stand still, letting the last chants echo, and realize you've walked a full circle, from dawn on the Nile to dusk in the necropolis, from bread and beer to eternity itself. Egypt's rhythm isn't just life, it's continuity, looping forever like the river's flood. The night deepens, and so does your own breath. Your steps slow, your eyelids soften. The voices of Egypt fade into whispers, their laughter, their chants, their music drifting far away. You imagine lying once more on a mud brick rooftop, stars blazing above you, the Nile humming faintly in the distance. The air is warm but calm, a fan's gentle hum filling the silence. You let go of the weight of fields, markets, tears, and tombs. You picture the river, stretching endlessly, black silt glittering under the moon, crops waving gently without need of labor. Cats stretch lazily in doorways. Families smile without worry, and honey cakes never run out. The afterlife promised to Egyptians was not gold and thrones. It was peace, rest, and the steady joy of enough. And that perhaps is the best lullaby, knowing that somewhere in memory and imagination, those fields are still green, those songs are still sung, and you too are folded into their endless rhythm. So breathe slower now, softer. Let your body sink, let the world drift. The sands hush, the stars widen, and the Nile carries you gently onward.